Hello, everybody. My name is Kenny Townsend, Director of Education and Programs at the Robert Russo Milton Museum, located in Farmville, Virginia. And today we have Mr. Justin Reid, who's a Director of Community Initiatives at Virginia Humanities, located in Charlottesville, Virginia. Justin, how are you doing today?
I'm hanging in there. I'm doing. No, I'm feeling much better. I've been looking forward to this. So this has been a nice break. Always a pleasure to be virtually home in the Milton Museum and talking to you.
Well, it's good to see you, and we're certainly glad to have you back in the museum, albeit in digital format this time. Hopefully soon we'll be able to do this in person, but one day. So I'm not sure exactly when it's going to air, but I will say COVID-19 will still be a household term by the time this airs, although we might have eased some social distancing kind of criteria and such. But this is another edition of our Milton interview series where we're interviewing folks Milton adjacent, friends of Milton, people doing stuff in the field that's really crucial and important and similar to what we're doing. And Justin is doing some great things in Charlottesville and has done countless great things for Milton in the past. I'm especially excited for this interview. Now, Justin, I know a lot about your background, but I'm not sure how many folks who are listening are going to know about your background. So if you wouldn't mind, just talk to us a little bit about your background, how you got interested in kind of historical preservation, community outreach, that type of stuff, and how you ended up where you are now.
Yeah, so I grew up in Farmville. I'm a Farmville native, and as far back as I can trace, my family has kind of been in that greater Farmville area. I trace my family back to Buckingham and Prince Edward County and Cumberland County. And I think for me, getting into history and public history, it really started at a young age. I mean, I think I wasn't even aware of it when I got started, but as I reflect back, I can see how being around my grandmother influenced me. Being around other older relatives really influenced me. I think back to my grandmother, especially Meryl's Randolph Reid, my late grandmother. I'm pretty sure that she is the first historian in my life. Mm-hmm. She didn't identify as such, but when I look at what she did, she definitely fulfilled that role. She was the clerk at my home church, Sharon Baptist, for almost 30 years. And, I remember she had like a copy machine in her house. Like this is, back in the 90s, nobody had copy machines at home. She had a copy machine at home. But her responsibility was, was preserving the church records and reporting out and making sure that history was conserved. And I got to watch her do that and the care that she took with all of that history. Her home, some people joke and say her home was the Black History Museum of Cumberland County, because she was a child care provider. She was a home daycare provider. And she had a lot of children from all over the community, and she would always accept photos. And so from floor to ceiling, there are all these photographs of different relatives, different children she had cared for over the years, prom photos, baby photos, photos of ancestors who had been enslaved. Her home was just filled with photos. And, in hindsight, I realized like how valuable that was to be surrounded by history and community and to be able to see that every day when I was there. So I think that probably was my beginning in doing this work.
Wow. I'm excited about this because I'm learning stuff I don't already know.
Yeah, well, Kane, I know you and I, we have a lot in common. Talking to you, our grandparents, I think that the connection we have with our grandparents is definitely one of those things. And when you grow up in the country like we did, right? It's really it's an incredible privilege. It's a blessing, right? To have such a large extended family, and be surrounded by that. So I think that has probably had the biggest impact. And to this day, whenever I'm working on anything, I'm constantly viewing, whatever history project that I'm working on through kind of a personal lens, like, really trying to think about kind of my own family context and how it connects back to maybe stories I've heard or relatives that I've known. So that's my best answer.
Yeah. No, it's a great answer, and I think that speaks testament to your authenticity and your integrity in everything that you do. And I think that being here, in Farmville, similar to many small communities, it helped that you were certainly from here, but doing historical kind of preservation work anywhere, like what's this person's intention? What's their motives? Like, are they trying to get, are people trying to make profit off of the back of this history? I don't think anybody could ever ask that about you, because you were just always true blue, Justin. This is important because this is important, not because career or whatever else. And that's admirable.
Well, I would say the same about you too.
I hope. I hope. So let me see, what's my question? I had a question. So you go to high school in Cumberland, right? And you graduate, you go to William and Mary. What was your major?
Well, I guess I should say I went to school in Cumberland County Public Schools. Go Dukes.
Not the Eagles, but I won't hold that against you.
You know, I'm trying not to hold that against you. I don't even think the rivalry is like it was back in the day, though. I remember when I was growing up, I'm going Prince Edward High School basketball game. Like the thing to go to, like it was incredible. I think from like my like uncles, like their generation too, for them, like playing Prince Edward was, that kind of crosstown rivalry type situation. Right. I went to Cumberland, but then so my junior and senior year, I ended up also going to the governor's school, which is a regional magnet program. And at the time that I was attending governor's school, it was actually housed at Longwood. And so for 2 years, for my junior, senior year, for half a day, I would come to Longwood's campus, Longwood University's campus, and we'd have class there. Most of the time was spent in the library. And then, I'm not even trying to remember the names of all the buildings. Okay, like, some things would just leave your mind after a certain period of time. I was about to try, but that was a really incredible experience for me and really important for me, honestly, because my governor's school experience was an opportunity for me to really show my creativity. It was really hands-on. I think it was project-based before people had really started to refer to it as such. And for me, knowing how I learned, it really helped me in a lot of ways. And so from there, I ended up going to William and Mary.
And so when did you, and what was your major in undergrad?
So my major, I studied American Studies, and then I did, now it's called Africana Studies too, but it was American Studies and Global Studies. And that's not what I intended to study at all, surprisingly. I went to William and Mary. I majored in international relations. It was an IR major for my entire time there, pretty much. I switched majors my senior year, like kind of crazily. It was a pretty crazy thing to do, but it's interesting, like kind of what I said earlier about what influenced me and really what motivated me to become interested in history. While I was an international relations major, I was constantly finding, I guess, parallels, maybe. There were things that I was studying that would remind me of home in a lot of ways. Throughout my time at William and Mary, I was taking American Studies courses for fun. And essentially American Studies, you can take, sociology is journalism, media, literature, history, government kind of all melded together. And so I would take these classes for fun while I pursued my IR major. But you know, as I was taking these classes, I couldn't help but to think about, home and particularly being from a rural area and learning about, rural places around the world. To me, there were just so many parallels. But I remember the summer before my senior year, I had the opportunity to study abroad in South Africa. And so, of course, this was, I guess at this point, a couple of decades post-apartheid South Africa, and they were still working through a lot of their, and still are to this day, right, working through issues related to race and racism and inequity. And I had the opportunity to experience how they were approaching that history and kind of see it up close and personal. And I feel like a light bulb went off, right? There was so much happening there. I almost felt like the sense of guilt. Like here I was devoting, my entire education to international relations. And here I am, in South Africa, and all these things that I'm learning about and I'm seeing remind me of things that are unresolved back home, and things I could be doing back home. And so I think that was really my light bulb moment, recognizing that, here I am learning about, the anti-apartheid movement, and there's a civil rights history in my own community that I don't know enough about, right? Here they are talking about how to bridge these divides, and at that time the buzzword was reconciliation. I'm spending all this time focusing on what's happening here, and there's some things in my own backyard, things related to my own family that I haven't really explored, and I needed to really devote more time to that. And so I think the summer before my senior year is when I was like, okay, maybe I want to do American studies and not just take these classes for fun. So my senior year, I was like the only senior taking freshman 101 intro American studies sitting in class with freshmen. Thankfully I had some great mentors who allowed me to go back and take prereqs for classes that I had already taken. So I could graduate, and I think that's kind of where it began. I mean, being in Williamsburg, it's a interesting place to be surrounded by that. But again, the faculty members I gravitated towards, those are the ones that really encouraged me to pursue this work. So that's how I got into it.
I feel like I already knew this, but you reminded me, like, you were super insightful, and I appreciate that, these connections. I mean, you must be an excellent writer too. I don't see it right.
I need to write more. I wish I could write more.
I'm bad at it, but I do wish I could. It'd probably get better with practice for me. So
I have a question for you though, Kanan.
Uh-oh.
All right, no, seriously, because this is I've been thinking about this, for this interview, like thinking about the history of Farmville and Prince Edward in the area. I feel like a lot of people our age, kind of our generation, Gen X, millennials, we didn't really grow up knowing a lot when it came to what happened in Farmville and Prince Edward County. And I'm wondering if you feel that way too, as if you're kind of having to go back and kind of retrieve the history you missed growing up.
Oh yeah, 100%. For another piece of content that we're not putting out probably anytime soon, but we're talking about field trips. And in elementary school, and I think I made a comment like this. I was in elementary school before Milton was a museum, and so I really didn't learn any of this stuff until probably high school. If I'm being perfectly honest.
Yeah.
I knew my dad was locked out of schools, but that was more through the extension of kind of him creating homework for me to do over the summer. And I was like, why on earth is this important to him that I am doing this instead of riding a four-wheeler outside or whatever I would be doing, playing video games or something. But, that didn't click until I was an adult, really. But I knew my dad was out of school, and I knew, that was pretty much it. And then in college, when the permanent exhibit, when I was in college, the permanent exhibit is completed in 2013. I got to see it, for the first time. But I think today we're doing this a much better job being done of it. But I think one of my big things is getting people, I feel like people our age don't care. Like that's like I tell people who I meet, what I do, and some are like, oh, that's cool. But my friends, like, they don't care that I work at a National Historic Landmark. Like, they're just like, all right, whatever. We're in the tech field or whatever we're doing. Like, we don't, it's like, why don't you care? Like, this is really cool. Like, why don't you care about this? This is really important.
Right, and a part of that, right, is not even about what it is you're doing, but it's about kind of how they were taught history, or just their relationship to history. It is difficult when when you think back to when I think back to my kind of social studies education. I had incredible teachers, but my experiences of visiting Colonial Williamsburg were not that great. Like, we were constantly going to Appomattox. That's what 25 miles away, right? So I feel like I had been indoctrinated with a certain interpretation of Civil War history growing up. But yeah, I think what you're saying and kind of that greater disinterest, right, is connected with the way history is taught and read, and the ability to really connect the dots, right, and see how relevant it truly is to this day.
Even when Governor Northam, when the schools, they no more schools throughout 2019, 2020 school year, in my mind immediately, and many minds immediately go to the school closings, right? Like, of course, obviously different circumstances, but one of my first thoughts is, how do we use that wisdom of those students, who the youngest of which now is probably 64 at minimum, at the end of a long career probably. How do we use that wisdom to help guide these students now who are experiencing something, a fraction of what these other students experience, but are having to deal with this now? And it's something we're still thinking about. But
see, all right, so you just made me. So I've been thinking about that too. Well, I guess maybe I should just back up and kind of address what we were describing earlier, about what we don't learn growing up in a community that has so much extraordinary history, that has such a huge national impact. I've been thinking a lot about why I didn't know that history, and I think it connects back to I don't know. I think a lot of it connects back to trauma, for a lot of people, and I do worry about the young people right now, and particularly those who are most vulnerable, right? Being out of school, and how they're processing it, and what it's going to be like when they return, because we also see that 50 years later in our own community, people are still kind of grappling with kind of the emotional and psychological wounds that occurred. Granted, right now, hopefully it'll only be this semester, right? I mean, God forbid it continues into the fall. But yeah, I've been trying to think about why I didn't know a lot of this. I remember being aware of Fuqua. I guess for those who don't know about Fuqua, Fuqua had previously been Prince Edward Academy, which had been the Segregation Academy founded during the school closing. And I remember being aware of Fuqua. And I remember kind of having a negative reaction whenever the name was mentioned. And this is like kindergarten, but didn't know any of the history behind that. But to me, it shows that even as a child, not knowing the history, I could still be influenced by it. I could still carry a collective memory, even if I couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. I remember talking to relatives, and of course, being Black, being from the South, we all have relatives who left, right, who migrated, who went various places. And so I knew I had relatives who went places and had left the South, or left Farmville and the surrounding area. And I think I just assumed that it was just what people just left. People, as soon as you get an opportunity, leave, you go. Didn't know that a lot of the relatives who had left, they left because of schools being closed. I don't know. This is a question that I would probably want to reflect with you off about, but it's something I've been.
Yeah.
I mean, feel free to include this, but it's something I've been thinking about and something I really wanted to kind of talk more about with like folks in our generation and really kind of investigate kind of what it is we grew up hearing and why we didn't know more. But I think a lot of that was because our family members, grandparents, parents, whomever who were here during that time, were still kind of grappling with the trauma of what had occurred. I will say, my junior year of high school, I was taking social studies. I forget which social studies class it was. But my teacher at the time, Mr. White, he said we would all get extra credit if we attended this program that was happening at Moton. And I ended up going, got there, it was packed. I don't even think I could see the stage. I might have been one of the side hallways, like up against the wall, just standing there while this program was happening. To this day, I still really can't think of like what it was about. Like, I don't really know. I think at that age, being like, I guess 16, 17, I didn't have like the historical analysis, that ability to figure out what was happening. But in hindsight, I realized that event was the 50th anniversary of the Brown decision. Moton was having a program. And it was like probably a decade later when I finally connected the dot. And so there's a part of me that says like maybe people were reticent, which I know to be true. And then there's a part of me that has to take some responsibility and say maybe I just didn't have like the emotional or like intellectual maturity to really grasp things that were said to me.
Right.
So,
this isn't where I expected this going, and that's more than okay. But it's making me think of another question. And I feel like if I let you keep talking, you were going to say something. But I guess how do we get people to care about, like, there's the notion that if we're just talking about African American history for this example, that Black people don't know Black history, right? It's often other people outside race, ethnicity that are doing the research that know it. And often I feel like there's and I'm sure you've seen this, it's the guilt approach, right? Such and such and so die for your right to do X, Y, Z. And I tend to think of that often as the, you tell me not to do something, I'm going to do it anyway approach kind of deal. Like, if you tell me this much I have to care about it, I'm much less likely to care about it because you're trying to guilt me into caring about it, right? So I guess, how do we make people care? I mean, you and I care, but I'm sure many folks who are in our generation, Gen X millennials, they're not as concerned broadly.
Yeah. I mean, that's a difficult question. I think in a lot of ways, Moton is addressing that issue. I think kind of the Moton approach, if we want to coin that now, the Moton approach to history education. So like even when I was there, and like, I think kind of your involvement, before you were on staff, I think it was really important to have kind of a generational bridge, right? And so it wasn't just young kids coming and having to hear directly from, elders, because, young people, kids are disrespectful. Kids, we're just, again, taking responsibility. I'm sure there were, people in my own family who were trying to teach me things. And I'm like, what are you talking about? But I think one of the things that Moton has been effective in doing is having a generational bridge. So it isn't just, I don't even know what Gen Z, I don't know what the future generations are called. But it isn't just young children and elders, but you have, the college students who are able to be there. You have young staff who are able to be there to serve as that link between the two generations. My earliest kind of museum memory is going to Maggie Walker National Historic Site. And the reason that really resonates with me and has really inspired me for so long is because it was my older sister who took me there. And you know, I look up to my siblings so much, right? And you know, to have somebody who's older than you, but like kind of young, and you know, you look up to them and you think they're cool, right? To be able to have them present the history to you, or to see them enthusiastic about it, I think has a huge impact on young people. But then I think too, one of the things that I hope is helping young people see this history as being relevant is you know, Moten's approach, which is more hands-on and more project-based. And you know, it's not enough to simply have students come in and know dates and know names and kind of know the timeline, but it's important for them to know about community organizing strategy. They need to know how to, you know, mobilize a community and really organize around the issues that they care about. They need to know the why and the principles behind what was done. And so in that way, the focus isn't really on the history, but it's more on kind of the contemporary lessons that you gain from the history in order to affect some type of positive change right now. And I think that's one way to make it relevant. I think we really do have to overhaul the way just history is taught, and I think that's something that's beginning to get more attention. I think, you know, I think both of us, I'll speak for myself, but I feel like both of us really would have really benefited from having a more localized kind of historical narrative in the classroom, and really seeing how, you know, what happened in our own community, what our parents and grandparents experienced connected to kind of the national narrative that we're typically taught. When I learned about slavery, you know, really only until recently, honestly, have I really personalized that history, which is strange to say because I've been like historically conscious, I think, for a while now, but I can still think back to being in a classroom, learning about slavery, writing about slavery, knowing I'm Black, and still not kind of making the strong personal emotional connection to that history. But now in hindsight, I realize, you know, how much more powerful would it have been if, in addition to me sitting in that classroom, I had the opportunity to learn about my own family members who have been enslaved, or visit the very sites that still exist. I mean, being in a rural community, many of these plantations still exist. Able to actually physically touch those spaces and visit those spaces, and to have a productive conversation that really pulls in these local sites. So I feel like that's a long, rambling answer. But yeah, so I guess to summarize, I would say we need to localize it.
Yeah.
Help people see those personal connections, right? We need to make it more project-based, make it more connected to contemporary issues. And then I think we also need to really spotlight the younger generation that is enthusiastic about history and sees the importance of it, and make sure that we're really spotlighting them and helping kind of this younger generation really see themselves and see that, you know, you can be young, you can be interested in this. It's unfortunate that kids will listen to the younger adult before they listen to their grandparent, but you know, there's no reason why we can't have both the grandparent and the big brother, you know, the whomever in the room together. This history feel relevant, but yeah, there are a lot of different ways, but
no, I think that's a great answer, and I think this wasn't your intention, but I think you were that person for me. At least you being at Moten when you were, and it was a good overlap, and it made me feel better about going there and trying to be involved and volunteering and interning there. I mean, you know, you were kind of my big brother in that aspect, and I always
glad to hear on it. I still remember that day. I feel like I remember the day you walked into Moten. Now I feel like I'm getting old. Now I'm becoming grandpa. Like, I remember back in the day, I remember when you. I mean, we're not that far apart in age, but you know, I remember when you visited for the first time. I think it might have been over the summer. It might have been Call Me Mister, right?
That sounds right.
And yeah, I feel like those are the moments that, you know, when I was at Moden, those are the type of moments that I live for. Like to be able to see you in that space with your personal connection, like reconnecting to that history. Like that's, you know, that was just a really, really powerful moment for me.
Yeah.
Anyway, we definitely want to have more moments like that for local students.
Pretty sure that's when I found out about like any other connection, because I didn't know there was anything else other than my dad being locked out of schools, and it was just kind of made him who he was. But you know, I didn't realize his aunts and
Yeah,
my great aunt. You know, my great aunt's like, I was like, wait a minute, Mildred Townsend. I was like, I know that name,
right.
and I
Like it was a small town, right? Because
yeah.
you know those last names. If you know about 20 of them, you pretty much know every.
I doubt there was another Mildred and Arlene Townsend who were sisters, and their father was named John. Like there's just no. And I asked my dad, he was like, I don't know if my grandfather would have been into something like that. I'm like, well, his name is there. So,
Right.
um, but anyways, this is emotional, Justin. But how did you end up at Moten in the first place? I don't even know that. I don't think.
Oh, how did I end up at Moten? Let's see. Let me go back. We talking about over a decade ago now. Let me retrieve some things I blocked out of my memory. But see what had happened. So I had stayed in touch. Like I remember when I was at home during the summer, I would come out. Like I remember being at a meeting. It was a community meeting with Studio Ammons, the exhibition design firm. And they were just getting community feedback. I remember attending that. And I would go to things when I could. Actually, let me rewind that a little bit. So I feel like I should start by saying kind of when I first became aware that there was something here that I hadn't been taught that I should have been. I was taking summer classes at William & Mary one year, and I was taking a constitutional law class, and the professor, you know, was teaching us about, you know, class action lawsuits and, you know, how lawsuits can be combined and argued together. I'm okay, all right, that makes sense. We're talking about Brown v. Board. I was like, okay, all right, and I've heard of Brown v. Board. I saw the Prince Edward case. I was like, okay, I think that sounds familiar, but suddenly I was able to connect the Prince Edward case to the Brown decision, because I don't think it had ever been taught to me that way, that this was a class action suit with 5 cases that were argued together. And then one day we sat in class and watched a documentary about Prince Edward County. And there were a whole lot of people in this documentary I knew. And I was like, what is happening? I was like, wow, okay. I was embarrassed, honestly, because they knew, like, you know, like my classmates at the time, they knew I was from Farmville. And I'm sitting in class watching this documentary and I'm recognizing people. You know, they interview students at Prince Edward, you know, who were about my age that I grew up with. Like, you know, I think that's when I think the light bulb went off, and I realized that, okay, there's more here than I've been taught. And I think I became just especially curious at that point. So I stayed in touch with Moten. I think after that, really, you know, would try to pop in whenever I was home during the summers, go to events. I remember going to an event that was sponsored. It was sponsored by Virginia Humanities, actually. It was John Stokes' book launch. I remember one of my aunts, my aunt Elsie, who's since passed, and she was active in the Marquis Forester Council. I remember she was there, and I was like surprised to see her. like what are you doing here? But I ended up staying in Williamsburg to work at Colonial Williamsburg. I mean, I did a few other things, but I ultimately ended up going back to Colonial Williamsburg and was there. And the opportunity to stay at Colonial Williamsburg or come to Moten and manage a grant that the museum had received. Those were kind of the 2 options that had emerged. And this was post-recession. And I was like, sure, I'm going to take like this part-time, grant-funded, time-limited position, move back home. Like, sure, that sounds great. So I actually first started working at Moton in 2011, and I wasn't even on staff. I was managing a grant that the museum had received from U.S. Department of Education. And I did that for maybe about a year and a half, and it was focused on promoting project-based learning. When I was at Colonial Williamsburg, I've been researching kind of museum interpretation and like cultural socialization for particularly Black and Latinx youth. And you know, it seemed like a good fit to then work on this grant project. And as that came to a close, I was like, all right, well, maybe I'll keep it moving. This has been great. And that's when Lacey Ward, who was the director at the time, he asked me to stay on beyond the grant project, and I decided to join the museum staff once that grant ended. So I don't know, it was very, I guess, serendipitous in a lot of ways. I simply came back home, for what I thought was going to be a few years, and ended up being 6 years. And I started out as, I don't know, the positions have changed quite a bit since I was there, but my title was Executive Director for Museum Operations. We had such a small staff. I was managing the bookstore, I was doing public programming, I was doing operations. It was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
The renovation was just beginning to get started, and we were still doing some fundraising for that. Like I remember I gave tours to empty rooms. Like I don't know if people were being honest with me. They're like, "It was such a great tour." I was like, just imagine like this. Like this is where we're going to talk about, this history, and I remember Cherie coming on board, which was just like incredibly important to be able to have her oversee guest services. So yeah, that was kind of my trajectory. When I was at Colonial Williamsburg, I thought, maybe one day, after I go back to school, after I have some experience other places, I could return home and work at Moton. Like I kind of always had that in the back of my mind. I didn't realize it would be so soon. But I had a mentor at Colonial Williamsburg, Kari, who told me if I ever had a chance to work at a small museum, I should do that because you get to learn so much. And he was right. It was stressful, right? I know it's still stressful because people don't realize what it's like to work at a museum sometimes. But that's how I ended up at Moton, just really showing an interest, staying in touch. And then when I was needed, I accepted the call.
I think we were better for it.
Thank you.
Well before I had any idea of what any of this was, but
yeah. Well, and it's interesting thinking back, because even as I was starting to work at Moton, I guess like all of us, I was still learning the history, still, asking relatives questions that they didn't want to answer, that type of thing. But for me, one of the things I kept thinking about, okay, I know how my brain works. If I can understand it, maybe others will too. And so a part of me was like, how do we begin to really simplify the messaging, like not water it down, not be inauthentic, but how do we begin to really hit those key points? And a lot of it came down to really thinking about the story as kind of being two stories that are very complicated, but looking at two generations, like that's one way to begin to kind of organize this very complicated history. You have the walkout generation and the locked out generation. How do we talk about the lawsuit? We had never done the math really up until that point. One day I remember going through and we started like counting, and when you actually begin to count all the plaintiffs who were involved in the 5 cases, you see that, you know, the majority, 3/4 came from Farmville and Prince Edward County. So really thinking about, okay, talking about Brown and talking about, you know, the majority of the plaintiffs in Brown were from Farmville, talking about the 2 generations of students, because people would often conflate the 2 groups, you know, thinking if you went on strike, you were also locked out of school, and not recognizing that those are different experiences. You know, really trying to get people to begin to recognize the Griffin decision. I think which was really important, that the schools didn't just miraculously open. You know, it took a lot of grassroots organizing, student organizing, and it took another Supreme Court decision to get schools reopened. Like how often do you come across a rural community that produced 2 Supreme Court decisions, right? I mean, you know, kind of the fortitude that it takes to do that, right? But I think another thing, and kind of going back earlier to, you know, what I was saying about trauma, like recognizing that there was still and still is a lot of trauma. I felt as if a lot of the writing and the reporting about what happened, like, further traumatized our community in a lot of ways. There was this constant, you know, re-traumatization happening. And I mean, you have a counseling background. You can definitely speak to this way better than I can, but, you know, we weren't focusing on resilience. You know, we weren't looking at the way parents were determined to do whatever they could to ensure the children receive some education. And the narrative was so focused on victimhood, right? That we couldn't really see our own strength and resilience and agency in the story. And I felt it was really important to pull that out as much as we could. And I think we're still doing that. I mean, I think we're constantly, right, still learning about, you know, kind of the miraculous ways that people dealt with what was happening. So yeah, I think for my time at Moton, it really felt as if, as a community, we were beginning to rethink our own history in a different way. And I know there's still a long way to go, but I think despite everything that happened, we also have to recognize that what we were able to persevere through and accomplish for this country is so extraordinary. And I'm like processing it as I say it aloud. These are like some offline conversations we can have.
Yeah. No, and for me, it's super interesting hearing you talk in this way about your time at Moton, because it's interesting, because everything you're saying in, you know, in the thought processes about how you got to where you got, like, I never had to experience it in that. So, like, for me, it's always been like, oh yeah, and we'll get to this part, and 3/4 of the plaintiff in Prince Edward County, then we go to the next part. We've always, since I've been here, you know, it's always been a split, you know. So hearing you kind of conceptualize that, I'm like, wow, like that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so that's really cool to me.
And again, maybe it's because of coronavirus. I've been reflecting. You reflect on your whole life, all 3 decades that I've had to experience. But I was obviously inheriting a memory of what had happened without even knowing what had happened. Like, you know, we were all inheriting a memory and not the history. And I think one of the things that Moton has been able to do is really help people place their memory within a larger historical context. Sure. You know, you can see how your story connects to another story. You can see kind of what was happening at the various levels of government. Sure. People are becoming aware of, you know, things that were going on behind the scenes to get schools reopened. You know, this story is so complicated and so huge, and for so long, because we didn't talk about it, most people only had their memory. So now I think we're able to better understand our memories, right? Because we can connect it to the history. You know, I had assumed that, kind of based on kind of what I had heard initially, is that all white residents in Farmville had one belief, right? And kind of, you know, all Black residents felt one way. You know, that's kind of how it was simplified. You know, so it's so much more complicated than that, right? We know that, you know, there was kind of this interracial coalition working together kind of behind the scenes. You know, we now know the white students, you know, even though it was a small group, but there were a few who were also out of school. You know, it's just incredible. I think, you know, people are going to be writing about Prince Edward and Farmville for centuries. You know, we see the Appomattox and Civil War, and that story has not ended. There's so much to be written, so much to be said.
Absolutely. So, and we're gonna need to have a longer conversation in the future, Justin, for sure. But you and I did get a chance to work on staff together for about 3 days. Me transitioning in, you transitioning out. And then you went to, and that's when you first went to go work for Virginia Humanities.
Yeah.
You might share a little bit, what was that transition like for you?
Yeah, so right now I work at Virginia Humanities, which was previously known as the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities. And we've been around for about 50 years now. And we have a long relationship with the Moton Museum, actually. Something I think I really figured that out as I was leaving Moton, and I was like trying to organize things and put some papers aside. You know, when Moton was being founded, there was a lot of resistance in the local community. There were a lot of people that didn't want to see the building saved. They didn't want to see the museum be founded. And the Martha Forrester Council, you know, just like this phenomenal group of Black women who were able to really rally the community, and they were able to connect with Virginia Foundation for the Humanities. And through Virginia Humanities, we were able to conduct a feasibility study. It was funded by the Kellogg Foundation, actually. And this feasibility study showed that the building could in fact be preserved and converted into a museum. So that's kind of how the connection between Virginia Humanities and Moton began. It began very early on when the building was being saved. And Virginia Humanities administered the first major grant that the Martha Forrester Council received to save the building. And kind of since then, that relationship continued. And so I had kind of been aware of Virginia Humanities even while I was at Moton, and had done some work with them on various things. But I came to Virginia Humanities in 2016 as Director of African American Programs. And essentially, my work focused on kind of building the capacity and supporting efforts all across Virginia. I mean, there are a lot of communities, right, like Farmville, that, you know, have this incredible story, are working really hard to ensure others are aware of it, and they just need, you know, a little additional support, you know, or somebody to help make a connection. And we try our best to support local history, education, preservation, community development all across the state. We were founded in 1974. Every state and U.S. territory has an organization like us. We were all part of the National Endowment for the Humanities, which is a federal agency. And so essentially, the National Endowment for Humanities, NEH, wanted to be able to better reach states and local communities. And so in each of the states and the US territories, these state humanities councils were established. And so the organization I work for now is the State Humanities Council for Virginia. And so we award grants to museums and libraries and local historical societies, cultural organizations. But we also do we also do our own programming to a certain extent. Like we have the annual Virginia Festival of the Book that we organize. We have a couple of radio programs that we produce. We have a folk life program that helps produce the Richmond Folk Festival every year. But the humanities is this kind of this broad and somewhat nebulous term for a lot of people, but really it's, it's about history, it's about culture, literature, religion, philosophy. We always say the things that kind of make us human, those aspects of ourselves that really help us connect with one another and be able to empathize and understand one another. We try to support. So I started out as director of African American programs, and this past December I became director of community initiatives. And we're beginning to evolve in a lot of ways. We have a new executive director, our second executive director in our nearly 50-year history. He started about 3 years ago, Matthew Gibson.
I did not know that.
Yeah, no, Rob Vaughn was our founding director.
Oh, maybe I didn't know that.
Yeah, Rob Vaughn, who passed away a couple of years ago. So he retired before he passed, and Matthew Gibson is our new executive director. Matthew represents a different generation.
Right.
One of the things that we're really focused on now is really strengthening those relationships with communities that we may not have adequately served in the past, and a lot of new communities that are emerging that never received the attention that they deserved in the past. I mean, obviously Virginia is evolving, right, in so many different ways. My office and my position is really focused on building those relationships and making sure that our work and our organization reflects, this evolving Virginia. We have a Asian American population that's incredibly large. I don't think people are even aware how rapidly growing the Asian American population in Virginia is, particularly in Northern Virginia. We have not done an adequate job exploring queer history or history of Virginia's trans community. I mean, there's so many aspects of our history that we need to do a better job of history and culture, I should say, because culture, I guess, a little bit broader. There's a lot there, and so my main responsibility is to kind of figure out, how we can organize Virginia humanities to meet those needs and to build and sustain those relationships.
Great. And I don't want I'm being mindful of your time. I don't want to take up too much.
All right. Stay tuned. Part 2.
We're gonna have to. What kind of so I guess in closing for the recording, what kind of are there initiatives you're working on now or in the near future or projects that people should know about, and or what ways can people kind of stay up to date with what's happening with you and Virginia humanities?
Yeah. So I would definitely encourage people to visit our website, virginiahumanities.org. We're on social media, Twitter and Facebook. On Twitter, it's VA Humanities. Facebook, Virginia Humanities. You're aware of this because you've been deeply involved, but for the last couple of years, we've had a task force that's really, I think, just getting off the ground. But the McAuliffe administration has established this task force, or I should say, signed off on this task force. Delegate Dolores McQuinn introduced this legislation, and Governor McAuliffe signed off on it to establish what's now known as the African American Cultural Resources Task Force, and that's something that's managed through my office. And Kanan was appointed to by the McAuliffe administration. But we know that there are deep inequities when it comes to what history gets taught and gets preserved. So I think for the next few years, this task force is really going to be focused on solutions. Like, how do we ensure that this work is more inclusive? How do we ensure that more local sites are being preserved and are really being restored, to the point where they're able to support the local economy and to create jobs and to really help promote kind of a prouder place, or at least a better understanding and connection to place. I think those are the types of questions that we're going to be tackling in the next couple of years. There are a lot of things happening right now. I mean, primarily we're focused on COVID-19 and responding to the crisis. Because we're the State Humanities Council, we've been tasked with granting funds from the CARES Act to organizations across the state. And so I'm really focusing on that and figuring that out and trying to ensure that that's as fair as possible. Although, I think we have about $600,000 to award. When you look at kind of what a lot of corporations are receiving,
right.
It kind of gets back to your point earlier. We have to work harder to ensure that people really see the importance of our cultural heritage and these institutions and museums that are working to preserve it. Because, like who are we without them? Like who are we if we don't know exactly who we are and the history that we're connected to and how that informs our present? So, yeah, we're involved in a lot of different things, but essentially our goal is to try to promote incredible work that's happening on the ground across the state.
So I guess that brings another question I didn't have before, but so how those who are able, how would you recommend, how can we support these organizations at this time for those who came? And I don't know, everybody's kind of going through it, but like, is there something you recommend? I don't know myself, and this is a question I'm curious about.
Yeah, it's tough because we have hospitals, right, that are struggling.
Right.
There's so much. This such a great need right now. I think one thing we can do, particularly those who have the means, is to continue to support these institutions and maybe support them even more right now if you have the ability to do so, to really advocate on their behalf. There are opportunities where Congress is having to determine where funding is going, and you can work to make sure that these important community institutions are being supported. Simple things, right? Like sharing content that's being produced, really engaging online, showing that these places really matter by continuing to engage as much as possible. But I think, in a lot of ways, this is going to force us to really rethink how we operate, how we generate revenue, how we build public-private partnerships. There's so many things that are going to have to change as a result of what's happening right now. And there are a lot of hard conversations that are going to have to be had. And so I think as much as possible, we need to make sure that those conversations are inclusive in the communities that surround these institutions are part of that conversation, and kind of reimagining, re-envisioning what the future is going to be.
Yeah, and I hope I didn't put you on the spot with that particular question.
No, so you've been putting me on the spot this whole thing.
It is something I've been thinking about a lot. How do you compartmentalize I forget who said it. You might know the quote, like there's no hierarchy to oppression, right? Like everybody needs something right now. So like, is it? Yes, but I think your answer kind of hits the nail on the head. Share the content, engage with the content. Everybody's got a phone, pretty much. Make a phone call, right, to your congressman or senator, something. Be involved and make sure these people know that these organizations are valued. And if we don't act, after all, a lot of them may not be there anymore, and that's nobody wants.
Yeah, but I'm hopeful too. Like, are there things that we can do differently in the future that will help us sustain these important institutions?
Right.
If there were to be another crisis, like what can I'm trying my best to think about kind of post-pandemic. You know, it's hard to sometimes, right, when you're in the middle of it. But you know, kind of what are the things we can do and build after all of this that will prepare us for, you know, the next crisis. Right? And what are the lessons we can learn now?
Yeah, true. I mean, whenever this is released, if we're on the other side of this already, which I'm not sure we'll be, but it's going to be different. It's going to be different all around, and I think forever it'll be different. But I think we will have to have, like you said, a lot more deliberate conversations about sustainability, about staffing, about permanence. I mean, we're very thankful here at Moten, you know, with the partnership with Longwood in 2015. You know, we're all state employees. We're all in the essential category, right? But not a lot of. There are plenty of other museums who don't have that same benefit.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation because, you know, I mean, I was there for when the affiliation was being ironed out, and it took some time for me to come around to it. And ultimately, I very publicly supported it, but you know, kind of thinking about where Moten was pre, you know, affiliation with Longwood. I'm not sure how we would have really survived something like this at that point, because it was already challenging, right?
Right.
So, yeah, glad to see you all doing your thing,
trying,
making sure some important history and lessons are heard and better known. Yeah, I feel like there's gonna be a lot of things now I'm gonna reflect on after this conversation. So, you give me a lot to think about.
Well, I appreciate your insightfulness and your honesty, and we appreciate you, Justin, and all the work you have done and all the work that you are doing. And I think there's a lot of quotables I might be taking out of this interview and sharing on social media, kind of separate bits and separate bits too. But we appreciate you.
I appreciate you. Tell everybody I said hello.
I will do that. Any last words? Do you want to plug your social media or anything like that, or you all come?
It's not going to run across the screen at the bottom.
I can do that. I learned.
Listen, let me tell you, I have a love-hate. I think like a lot of people with social media, but I've kind of resigned myself to simply using Twitter. That's my only social media outlet at the moment. So it's Griffin Boulevard. Actually, it should be easy to remember for anybody that loves and supports Moten. Griffin BLVD is my Twitter handle, at Griffin Boulevard, which is a place that just means so much to me. You know, my family grew up in that neighborhood. Had relatives that worked really hard to have that street named in honor of Reverend Griffin. So I guess in a lot of ways, my Twitter handle is a reflection of my love for kind of the neighborhood my family grew up in Farmville. So
great. Thank you, sir. We appreciate you so much. Hopefully you stay safe and stay healthy inside. And until this thing is over and we can see each other again, hope everything continues to go well.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been good. Look forward to some more of this.
Yeah.
Not this per se, but more like you and me.
Yeah, of course.
And
likewise.
Just work it out.
Yeah. All right.
All right, Kane.